tornadoes, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, hurricanes, all of these. And so I was sitting on an airplane once flying back from, I forget where I was, it might have been on a mission trip, and I'd got back to the United States. And it was after a terrible natural disaster, and the woman who was sitting next to me had this to say. She said, I can't see how anybody in the world could believe in God when something so terrible, it might have been the Southeast Asia tsunami, one of the most terrible natural disasters in the history of humankind. She said, I can't understand how anybody, she didn't know I was a preacher, how anybody in the world could possibly believe in God when things like this happen. That's a good question. And so once more, I want to invite you to question your assumptions. So there are some people who say every tsunami, every earthquake, every natural disaster, every flood, it all came from God. Now that was easier to understand in a pre-scientific age when terrible things would happen and people said the gods must be angry or God must be judging people. If you were an Israelite, you might believe that. But today we understand the forces of nature. We've come to understand at least many of them. We understand why things happen the way that they happen. And we know that most of these things, these forces of nature, are a part of what maintain homeostasis on our planet. They're a part of what's necessary on our planet to survive. So I think about earthquakes, and this is an example I've given many times. As I studied plate tectonics, there's a mantle underneath the crust of the earth, and that mantle is magma, and that magma superheats as it gets closer to the core of the earth, and then it rises because, as it's hot, it becomes thinner, it rises, and the heavier, cooler stuff, falls down. And so you find this constant convection motion of the magma underneath the surface and underneath the crust of the earth. And what happens is when it rises to the top, as it begins to cool, it begins to fall back down. And the surface of the earth, the plates on top of that, move with it. So there's a constant conveying action, a conveyor action that's happening. And so those plates are moving, that's plate tectonics, and those plates collide into each other, right? And when that happens, and finally they can't handle the stress anymore, there is an earthquake. If that earthquake is under the surface of the earth or under the ocean, then there is a tsunami. We find there are places where those plates collide and where magma is finally released, and those are volcanoes. We understand these forces, at least we're beginning to understand these forces. This isn't God causing that to happen, nor is God stopping it from happening. Why doesn't God stop it from happening? Because our planet needs that to happen, because in order to sustain life, the mantle has to cool. Constantly cooling itself. It's a mechanism built in. You say, well, couldn't God make a planet where that couldn't happen, where that didn't happen, it wasn't necessary? Well, I know we say God can do anything, but it may be we have this kind of planet because this is the only way you can create a planet where it'll sustain life. And so I'm not to question that. It's above my pay grade. What I can say is it seems necessary for our planet to sustain itself in this way. I think about hurricanes. And when you think about hurricanes, you're thinking about, again, atmospheric conditions in which the atmosphere of the earth is regulated. Tornadoes, the same thing. And so all of those things have to do with exchanges of energy and temperatures. And in all of that, it makes our planet sustainable for life. And we humans play some role in that sometimes when we think about warming, the warming of the oceans, the warming of the atmospheric temperatures, that we play some role in advancing the number of horrible climate-related incidents that happen in our world. But ultimately, God isn't the one who's causing every tornado or every hurricane. He's created a planet where these things are an essential part of life. And when we collide with those natural forces, sometimes we're going to die. And that's tragic. I think that's tragic to God. It's tragic to us. And often the people who die most frequently in earthquakes or hurricanes or terrible flooding are the people who couldn't afford to live somewhere else or build a house where it could sustain the earthquake forces, right? Or the tornadoes or whatever it might be. So the people who normally suffer are the poor. Why are there people who are poor on the earth? What role do we play as human beings in that? And somehow we all play some role in how the economics of our planet work. And so God doesn't force us to give up what is ours to help somebody else, but he hopes that we will. And so when I look at the forces of nature and the people who die in those so many times, I think it's an indictment upon the human race, not upon God. But God created a world that's beautiful and life-sustaining, and we give thanks for that.